looking at. Parapsychological evidence for the afterlife. Now, reincarnation, in the Western tradition called transmigration of souls. Huge part of, obviously, Eastern, Hindu, Buddhist religion philosophy and antiquity up till contemporary times. And in the West is a huge part of the Greek spiritual philosophical tradition in antiquity. Orphism, kind of think where it starts. Pythagoras jumps on it, and then Plato, and the Neoplatonism, in late antiquity, Plotinus and Proclus, those guys were into it. But not part of the Christian tradition, at least very scantily so. And as a result, not part of the European Western tradition, and all the way through late antiquity through contemporary times. It's kind of a foreign idea to most people in the West, at least. It certainly was until more recent times, the last century or two. So, what do I want to say about it? First off, first thing is that in the Western tradition, going back, 150 years or so, when reincarnation first started to appeal to New Ager types. I like myself, I'm kind of a New Ager. It's kind of this attitude, oh, it's cool, man, I'll find out about my past lives, I knew I lived before, but in the East and even in the ancient traditions, it's more of a somber fact of reality. Right, it's something that I goofed or whatever. Karma's led me here, or if you're in a good spot, you want to keep it going. Certainly, karmically, and the ultimate goal, at least in most cases, is to get off this cycle of birth and death, or at the very least, if you're going to be reborn, do so voluntarily, in control, like the Bodhisattva vow, who postpones final nirvana in order to return and help other sentient beings become enlightened. Similar idea in Neoplatonism. But, so, this background in terms of how this idea of reincarnation was thought of in the more greater philosophical religious scheme, East and West, it's kind of, it's better than not existing, right? Certainly, I think most people would agree, unless, you're going to be reborn into some sort of apocalyptic, post-nuclear Holocaust hellscape scenario. That would be a bad reincarnation, where you're fighting off giant cockroaches, But, generally speaking, I think it's good, especially if we're able to keep this whole project going on the planet and make things better and better, more and more chances of being reincarnated into a good life and so forth. So that's the background. But is it true? Why should we believe it's true, right? Well, there wasn't a whole lot of evidence for it that I know of until, at least well documented, until fairly recently, 20th century. It was the work of Ian Stevenson, although other research before him had certainly recorded cases. And what these cases are a typical case involves a child, 2 to 3, because to speak of a personal life, eventually expressed as detailed knowledge of a specific deceased person's life, and these details are later confirmed to be accurate. In addition, there's recognitions if they're fortunate enough to come in contact with the deceased person's family members and friends. You can get further evidence. We're going to have some cases like that where there's multiple recognitions in some instances. So, what does a typical kind of case look like? One, let's see here. A boy named Corliss Chopkin Jr., the age of 13 months, reportedly said to his mother, "Don't you know me? I'm Kakoti." Now, Kakoti was the tribal name of Victor Vincent, the deceased uncle of Corliss' mother, a man who had told his niece he would be reborn as her next son, and it appears to have accurately predicted the location of 2 birthmarks her future son would have, which corresponded to scars he got on his back and nose. Right? If something happens in reincarnation cases. There's birthmarks that correspond to scars and often wounds, even death wounds, I should say, of the deceased person. In fact, there's one case for Stevenson where he notices a scar right here. They find out the person they think this person had been shot this way, and so they shaves his head, finds out, lo and behold, he's got a birthmark up here too. Entrance room, exit room, right? Remarkable stuff. There's another one where there's like a shotgun pattern type birthmark right on the chest of somebody that showed memories of a person who'd been killed, shotgun blast to the chest. So, not going to be a big part of what I'm doing here, though, although significant, worth mentioning. And so, also with this case with Victor Vincent and Corliss, the young child had these details suggesting he was psychologically continuant with Vincent, such as a recognition of his stepdaughter. I remember like a fishing trip where his car broke down and he dressed up. He put on his Salvation Army uniform so somebody would stop and help him. So, does that prove it? Is that it? Do we do it? Right? Corliss, Chopkin's memory, Victor Vincent, his uncle, or his great uncle, right? That's it, right? It's over. Like, in the video. Reincarnation is true. No. Some people might doubt that Corliss, could have heard this information about his uncle because he was raised in the family. Somebody might have talked about the fishing trip. Someone might have talked about Susie, right? Knows these things, knew these things, and for that reason, enough of the case is like not evidentiary at all, but it's not like super, super powerful, even though on the surface, right, pretty compelling, right? Birthmark thing. You might explain away the birthmarks in terms of like, the mother incorporating that, prediction and somehow manifesting them in the womb somehow. Doesn't have to be reincarnation. However, when you have cases of birthmarks by somebody who's, another area of the world, or part, other town far away, right? And by a mother who knows nothing about, this person's death and or scars or whatnot, then those cases become tougher. And there's plenty of them in the literature. So I'm going to be focusing on the personality stuff, right? The birthmark stuff, interesting. But cases I'm looking at, the strong cases, it's mainly because of the psychological continuity that appears to be on display. Say there's 2,500 cases suggested of reincarnation on file at the University of Virginia as of like 2013 or something. So last body of research, I'm sure there's much more now. There's more cases in the East and in cultures where reincarnation belief is common, but the potency of the cases doesn't appear to be a whole lot stronger of the best cases. Like you still have very strong cases surfacing in the West, and they're even made more stronger by the fact that family members don't believe in reincarnation, and thus the evidence surfaces in spite of the beliefs, not like in congruence or because of it, some might argue, right? But I'm going to talk about a couple famous cases first in the East. First one is Bishan Chan, who at the age of 10 months old, I believe. It's a youngin'. One of his first words, starts saying Pilvit or Pillavit with a V. And then he gets a little older, he starts saying Pillavit. And it's a town 30 miles away from the town that he grew up in, barely. And he said he was from there, spoke of his life, makes a number of statements about this life, and displays kind of this like aristocratic attitude, adult attitude. Drinks brandy, complains about his ragged clothes, and he used to have much nicer clothes. Said he used to have a mistress. Told his father he should get a mistress, and he would enjoy the fragrance of her hair and great joy in her company. And then investigator eventually shows up, gets these statements down, goes to Pilovit, is able to confirm all of them, all the early bird statements anyway that he makes about the town and the house primarily, and quite the story. So, biggest detail he gets right here about as far as the early bird statements. A lot of big stuff. Really, really big one is he mentions this fella. Right here. Yes, Sander Lau. Right. So Bishan had mentioned that he was a neighbor in his previous life of a fellow named Sander Lau, and when there's a green gate in this guy's house, and this turned out to be true. Right, which was a big confirmed statement. And then the really strongest points anyway, as important as the early bird statement is, really come from when he is taken to Philbit and he meets some of Lakshmi's family members, but some of the things that happen in Philbit, Bishan is taken to Lakshmi's school, where he recognized which classroom had been his and accurately described Lakshmi's old teacher as a fat bearded man. And that had been another early bird statement about that school. And he had said that he'd gone through 6th grade in the school, knew Urdu, Hindu, English. He also made predictions about his house early on that are accurate, and how many rooms are in the house or whatever. And all these were true, 100% early birds. I think the most impressive ones, probably about the neighbor's name, the house with the green gate. But the fact that he studied the 6th grade, pretty impressive. Anyway, in Philbit, like I said, he recognizes a classroom and which classroom had been his. He said that was mine, and then accurately described Lakshmi's old teacher as a fat bearded man. He at Sander Lau's place, Bishop pointed to the courtyard where he claimed the dancing girls used to entertain guests with song and dance. A fact confirmed by merchants who lived in the area. He's asked about a treasure at Lakshmi's house, and it's thought to be hidden. And he leads the way to the room, and they find the treasure coins. Lakshmi and his mother met Bishan, questioned him, and became convinced he was a reincarnated to her son. Really impressive feature there is that Bishan told her about the time he'd thrown out a jar of pickles. When the story was that she'd asked him, her pickles have worms in it. She told him to throw out the worms, keep the pickles. He threw the pickles out too, probably not wanting to eat pickles that had worms swimming around him. It pissed his mom off. He also provided the correct name of his personal servant, name and description of his personal servant. So, said to have wept bitterly upon seeing the state of his former home, Lakshmi's home. You wonder about the description, if it's really a bitter, weeping, as opposed to a childlike wailing. I don't know. But generally, was reported as very, very mature. I believe he picks out a former classmate from a crowd of people. Says, "Yeah, that was you're so and so. We went to school together." So really strong case. Bishan Chan. And so he bragged about murdering a man who left the mistress's house. I don't think they were able to confirm that detail, but he bragged about that as a child, and that in his previous life he'd had a mistress, murdered a man he saw leaving the house, and that the man that he'd murdered, he was able to get away with it because of having been wealthy and had connections with like law enforcement, whatever. Thought this was all really cool. Later in life, as his memory fades, that one memory sticks out to him. He still remembers it, and he ends up being convinced that he'd been born into a lower caste as punishment for his act, and came to regret it. And he became to be a much more calm, temperate, less prone to angry outburst as he got older, as opposed to he was a little hot as a child, much like the memories he'd had of the previous life that fella had been. So, Mission Enchanted, I submit to you strong case number 1. Swarn Lata Mishra. Hello there, kitty. Who were you in a previous life? So, the next one, born 1948, Swarn Lata Mishra. She's really impressive. She recognized like 20 different friends and family members when she's taken to the town that she had memories of from since she was a small girl. This town was much further away too. In this case, she was 120 miles away from her original hometown. Then she moved to another town that was 170 miles away from this town, which was Cottony, was the name of the town. So a small girl, it's similar with actually a mission. She's like a train or a car going somewhere, and was just, oh, turn right, that's where I live, Like, what are you talking about? And she makes a number of statements about a previous life. At some point, somebody from that town comes into her town from the previous life, and she recognizes them. They're like, oh. So, like, unlike Mission Enchanted actually named the town. I don't think she had. Well, maybe she had, because she said she lived at that one. In any case, they got a number of early bird statements from her before they went to that town and investigated. Again, 120 miles away from where she first grew up, and 170 miles away from the other town. This is 1961. Wasn't in India. Wasn't just like there was just real super easy access to travel around. Like even if not, it's a long ways away. So early bird statements said about her house that she claimed to have lived in the previous life. So it was white. That's it. Pretty much a white house. That does it, right? Black doors fitted with iron bars. A little more specific. 4 stuccoed rooms, rest of the house unfinished. All true when she was alive. Now we're getting somewhere. Family owned a car, rare at the time. Not unbelievable, but another hit. A girls' school located behind the home. Odds are that, but another hit. A railway line visible from the home. I mean, railway lines are visible from lots of homes, but another hit. Lime furnace visible from the house. And the front floor was made of stone slabs. I don't know what percentage of homes have front floors made of stone slabs. That would be interesting to know. But they're all hits. All these early bird statements correct. And then they go to the investigator, to this town and investigate Cottony, and they find that house, matches his description, and they talk to the family, and there's a young girl who died, not a young girl, I'm sorry, a woman who died named Baya, that they seem to match the girl's memories, and so when they take her there, she really good. I mean, she recognizes everybody. The only thing she got wrong, I think she used the wrong name for her son, but it was like a kind of a colloquialism or an abbreviation, for the formal name. Like if you called someone named Edward Teddy, and then she actually didn't get her own name right, but then she got it right on her second attempt, and she said she was thinking of another life that she lived in. This was been 9 years apart, 11 years apart, something like that, and she had memories of life in between Baya's life and then her current life now. So interesting. They never were able to confirm or discover that person. But she claimed that's where she claimed to have learned this dance her parents couldn't understand. She knew that included some lyrics in Bengali that she would sing that her parents like she didn't know, and she only really Bengali she knew was when she was doing that dance. She could say it, So in any case, they tried to trick her up. Say, no, I'm not like your Uncle Johnny, I'm really, your cousin Freddie or whatever. I think one uncle like kept this up for like 24 hours. She wasn't buying it. A couple of attempts to trip her up. They all failed. She, from a crowd of 40 people, was asked, hey, know anybody in that crowd? She successfully selected her father's cousin, brother-in-law's wife, and a midwife she knew, and then she referred to the midwife in the same manner that I had referred to her. She knew about gold teeth Maya had. Somebody I don't know, maybe teased her, said she missed a bunch of teeth or something. I can't remember. She knew gold teeth. Knew about a specific trip she took. Also knew about her husband having taken some money from the family estate or whatever, even though they disagreed on the amount, 1,000 versus 1,200, which I think is kind of funny. But doesn't I don't think that is disconfirming at all that the husband had taken money from their little safe stash. And no, it was only 1,000. She said, no, it was 1,200. But anyway, very strong case. Really, no, as far as I know, just down outright full on misses. So 20 recognitions. Pretty specific early bird statements about the house. Pretty strong case. I rank it up there. That's why I included it. So, Swarn Lata. I encourage you to look it up. Sci Encyclopedia entry be a good place to start. So, now you're thinking, these are all old. The 60s. In the 60s, she was Swarn Lata, born 1948. Invested in this case, late 50s, early 60s. This was before Beatlemania. And this is before I was born, even. This was before, before internet or computers. We're talking a couple decades before Thriller, right? Nobody of these people had heard Billie Jean. How could you do reincarnation research in such a primitive society? So, maybe these cases stopped and we don't have to worry about it anymore and just say, it's a relic of just kind of these inferior, human beings, that, figured out how to split the atom or whatever. Okay. I'm being sarcastic. Let's do some contemporary cases. 2004, Ryan Hammonds. There's a bunch of cases continuing, even more and more. But here's a couple strong ones. Ryan Hammonds, the famous Hollywood case. He has memories. They finally figure out after some time that correspond to a 2-bit actor named Marty Martin from the 20s. Became a successful, I think, Hollywood agent. And pretty wealthy. And anyway, Ryan makes a ton of early bird statements. It took a while to find this Marty guy. And it's 47 to 55 correct statements, depending on how you parse them, about this guy's life, the color of his car, wouldn't let anybody drive it. He'd, have a pool in his house, and he was rich, agent, and correct statements about his children, and he had a few wrong ones. I think he said his dad had died. When he was a child, turned out that his dad had died only 6 years before he did. And then there's a statement where he said he got his daughter a guard dog. In truth, he got his daughter a terrier. Exactly a guard dog. But, still not, kind of a guard dog. And dogs need to bark and make noise, enough to scare away a criminal usually. But anyway, the big correct statement too is on the age. He said he died at 61 years old, which contradicted his birth certificate. But then they figured out the birth certificate was wrong, and he'd actually said, you know what? If I lived, I'd be 102 right now. He'd done the math, and he was exactly right. Still had behavioral characteristic, a lot of emotional turmoil about his previous life, a lot of concern for his children. And he liked like 50s music, sunglasses. I don't know. More of the same things other guys into. So Hollywood case, pretty strong. Um, the picture recognitions were good. He was solid in some trials, but he wasn't great. There's some trials where he was disinterested, and then the investigator admitted he didn't present him right, but he did successfully identify himself, and a couple of his both his ex-wives, I believe, from pictures. But the memories strikingly accurate. No way he could have gotten this information, right? We didn't know who this guy was. He was like so famous that he saw a show on or something. No shows on Marty Martin, right? So one case, and then I want to hit the final one here, James Leninger. So James Leninger was born in 1998, and as I think he's like when he was like 2. He had these nightmares where he would like die in a plane crash, right? And then he spoke about this, started speaking about it as it really happened to him, and so they began, asking him questions, about it, and early bird statements on James. He was shot down by the Japanese, shot in the engine. He was a Navy pilot, shot in the engine, crashed. He said that he had died at Iwo Jima. Turns out to be false, but he died at the Battle of Iwo Jima, so partial credit, I think. Said that his name was James, of course. Not a great shot because his name was James, but he was writing James 3 on these drawings he would do of these plane crashes. He said James 3, and they asked him why, and he said because he's the third James, and that's important because they eventually find out that the details, especially of the plane crash, and other aspects of his life and statements appear to correspond to a guy named James McCready Houston Jr., James 2, James 3, right, of Pennsylvania, who had crashed and after being shot down, crashed into the water after being shot in one of his engines in the front of the plane in World War II, Battle of Iwo Jima, at Chichijima, which is harbor, which is like 150 miles away. But part of that battle, it took a while for them to find James, which kind of allowed for a lot of these early bird statements to come out, and other early bird statements. He said that he'd flown off of a boat, and they asked him what boat. He said Natoma. So there's Dad early on. It was like August of 2000. So James, 2 years, 4 months old. Dad Googles Natoma. Right, it's timestamp search, date stamp search, and it turns out there's an aircraft carrier, World War II, Battle of Iwo Jima, Natoma Bay. Whoa! Right, and he asked him what kind of plane he flew off there. He said it was a Corsair. Incorrect. However, they later find that James Houston did fly Corsairs, had a picture in front of him, stand in front of one, and it turned out that he test flew them off of aircraft carriers. So he was really familiar with them, and which would explain an early bird statement he makes about them landing. He says when they land, they would get flat tires. Also, they would veer off to the right. True statements, all early bird, and not something he could have gotten from normal sources of information, apparently. Now, James was taken at 22 months old because of his interest in planes. He started saying airplanes, all over airplane crash, I believe, very early on. And they took him to a World War II aviation museum when he was 22 months, and he loved it there, didn't want to leave. And they ended up getting this Blue Angels video for him that he watched over and over again. Might have been Corsairs mentioned in that video. I couldn't actually find, if not, but definitely not the specific information he gave about what they do when they land and take off, the problems that were, the details that were later confirmed to be true. So skeptics, because of that, they tend to cast more doubt on these claims, these statements that James makes about World War II and airplanes and these like technical knowledge he shows, which is very, very impressive. And it gets like more impressive, as he goes from 2, 3, 4 years old. These kids got this obsession with planes from a young age. He's watching History Channel, going to museums. It gets really hard to determine which facts there's no way he could have known. And I think that's a fair enough point. On the other hand, this detailed information about how the Corsairs are taking off, it's hard. If he got it from normal means, he should be able to find out, right? If there's some sort of video out there that can convey it, right? Like, it should be out there. And then, the aircraft carrier, right? You got the aircraft carrier, right? So aircraft carrier in Toma Bay, that's where James took off of. They asked James who he flew with, and he said he mentions a Jack Larson. They later confirmed Jack Larson did indeed fly with James, and on that day when he died, when he had the plane crash, Jack was out there too. But Jack didn't see the crash. They had to track down other people that saw the crash, and they described the crash, getting shot down. Very consistent with James. James said in the dream he was acted out, kicking up his legs, and the veterans, Matoma said, yeah, in that plane he was in. That's how you'd be trying to get out of the cockpit, So early bird statements, very, very strong, I would say, but it gets better because they finally get James around some of these. There's a meeting at one of these, I guess, like reunions these veterans from the Toma Bay would have. And I think the dad had posed as authors who had the book on him, and really he's doing undercover research trying to figure out if the son was really part of this squadron. And anyway, finally brings his son, and they meet them all. He meets them all, and he recognizes one fella, a voice, without being told who he was, somebody who James had known. And not only that, James Houston's sister was there, Annie Barron. And when he's told before this meeting, he said that, yeah, you're going to meet, James' sister Anne. He says, no, not Anne, Annie. Turns out that was the name that James called her, Annie. Not mind-blowing. But then he also said that they had a sister named Ruth, and that she was 4 years between so-and-so, age-wise, and that was correct, although her name wasn't Ruth, it was Ruth. But so that's another early bird statement hit, it would appear. And then after that meeting, at some point, his mom comes in his bedroom with a glass of wine, and he says, yeah, our dad would get drunk and smash things, talking about, dad, Anne and his dad from previous life, James Houston's dad, and then he's also said that when he was 13, dad spent 6 weeks in the hospital, and their mother had to work as a maid during this time, which upset Ruth, who was a gossip columnist. And then when father returned to the home, Annie moved in with the grandparents. All these statements were confirmed by Anne Barron, James Houston's sister. And then there was also a phone conversation with Anne Barron where she had sent him a painting her mother had done of their brother, and he asked her over the phone, where was the painting mom did of you? And it turns out there was a painting that her mom did of her, but nobody else was to know about it. I'm not as impressed by that one because he might have just inferred mom did paintings of everybody, but the other information's strong, and the whole body of evidence of the case is more impressive. I don't have time to get through all the details. These guys, he gets these dolls on separate occasions over a period of 6 months to a year or something like that. Names them Billy, Leon, and Walter. And at one point, I think after he gets third, he's asked why he named them these names, and he said because Billy, Leon, and Walter, they all greeted him when he went to heaven after the plane crashed, after he was shot down. And so they find out that from James' squadron, indeed, there was a Billy, a Leon, and a Walter who had all died before James. One of them, I think it was, I can't remember which one. One of them died in like a non-battle accident. The other two died in battle. They got like shot down or whatever. And then the hair color matches the dolls, man. This is crazy. Billy was a blonde, Leon brown hair, and Walter was a redhead, right? So you got the names of these people, and the dolls, right? It's not insignificant. Pretty kind of strong case. Now, one of the main reasons I'm going to touch this case and not others, because one of the academic philosopher, local one, discussed. This is a book by John Martin Fisher and one of his grad students, Fisher, at University California Riverside. He's like a big shot professor there, done a lot of work and like the meaning of life, which is like pretty cool, and on like whether or not death is bad for us. The Lucretian symmetry argument, it's called. Google that if you're interested. And also on like free will, moral responsibility. He wants to argue that you don't need free will to be morally responsible. Promotes these like Frankfurt type counter examples, including to show that. I don't buy it. I think you do, but I really like his work on like meaning of life, narrative values. This thing, you make your own narrative value by doing things that we tend to value in life, like being a good person, growing, doing creative endeavors, stuff like that. So Fisher, Martin Fisher. Now this book's on near-death experiences. It was part of a bigger project. UCR got some big checks from a billionaire, I think, who was interested in an afterlife, maybe, man. So they do this big study on the afterlife, a whole bunch of different sub-studies. And the one thing they do is they write a book on near-death experiences. Fisher is his grad student, and they try to debunk them pretty much, or try to provide a naturalistic explanation for them. And it's a mixed bag. I don't know how convincing they are. I'm going to critique them when I get to near-death experiences on that score. But they decide to dabble in reincarnation research for some reason in this book. Portion of a chapter, weird chapter, where they take up this Ledger case, and they show how they think they can provide in principle, a naturalistic explanation where you don't have to, posit reincarnation, to explain it. And I thought it was worth looking at it with their analysis because I think it shows how, like, these cases are kind of hard, or a lot harder to deal with than people think, because these arguments, academically trained philosopher, right? Like one of the best. He's published a lot. This guy publishes a ton. A workhorse. So here's how he begins his critique. Consider the fact that the Lenders visited a flight museum when James was 18 months old. So as I mentioned, James was actually 22 months old, so he gets the date wrong, which might help his case a little bit by doing so. You want to push that earlier because he was talking about airplanes for a long time before the flight museum. Maybe it's not as significant as, but I digress. Not that big a deal, but come on, get the facts right. It's going to get worse, though. During their visit, James walked around the very type of plane he later claimed to have been flying in his dreams. Corsairs. False. So there was no Corsairs at the museum at the time of his visit. Between 1999 and 2003, there was no Corsairs. They lent one out in 99 and didn't get it back because it crashed. Wasn't replaced until 2003. Didn't walk around in one. This is just wrong. But we're not done. His parents even claimed that he looked like he was conducting a flight check, like walking around in this Corsair. Oh my goodness. So there's a footnote here. You read the footnote, and you find out that this is actually something somebody else said about him, not his parents, and a trip to another museum like a year or two later, right? So 2 years later, I think, right? So 3 incorrect states here. Noting this detail about James' life seems like a promising start for providing an explanation of the obsession of the World War II aircraft and its fixation on Corsairs in particular. So you have three incorrect statements here: the age, the fact that they're of Corsairs in the museum and walk around in one, right? And they use this to, promising start. uh, so this is like philosophers are not always the best scholars. They use crappy scholarship. My man J. Angelo Collette told me that. Um, Philosophy of Religion and Ethics and Plato 702. There's his book on philosophy of religion, errors of atheism, and he's a big reason I got into reincarnation research because he referred me to parapsychological research for the afterlife. He mentions it in this book. That if you're into the afterlife, that's where you got to go. He doesn't go there. I did, and he encouraged me, and we had some good conversations. I wrote a good paper in his class. It's all kind of crap now, but at the time it was good. So, anyway, this, like I said, this knowledge and obsession with World War II, kids do that kind of stuff. That's not the real strong evidential stuff, right? And finally Fisher gets down here at the bottom of the page, and he says, even if James Ledger's detailed knowledge of World War II aircraft were to be explained in this way, it may still seem as though the case presents a serious puzzle. Okay, thank you. How could James have known the names of the people he recounted as being there with him in his dreams? He didn't say he was with them in his dreams. He said, mentioned the dream, then later said he was with them. But anyway, and he said he'd seen them in heaven. The other three guys. So anyway, right. Good question, right? How did he know about Jack Larson, right? Named early bird statement Jack Larson, plus these other three names, the dolls, matching the hair colors, right? How can he know? Fisher, they says like we're not sure, but it does seem possible to explain them without invoking reincarnation. Perhaps James heard these names somewhere. Well, obviously, that would be a way. Oh, I didn't think about that. Nobody thought about that. I'm being sarcastic. All right. Maybe they were mentioned in a television program he saw. The Londoners mentioned conversing to him about a program on World War II aircraft on the History Channel. So, okay, we could look that up, right? Or a book or museum exhibit panel somewhere. His parents read to him. Perhaps his parents mentioned them in conversations at home. James' dad did the search for Jack Larson early on, right? Like, so did he mention him and then forget he mentioned him and James went back to him? That's kind of what the case he's making. But if so, like, my thing here is like, these researchers, they're looking for cases that, where you really can't easily explain it so easily, right? And if it's mentioned in a TV show or on one of the exhibits and stuff, like, presumably, like somebody that would have been something to look into. If not, right? Then the question to raise is you ask, okay, what about that History Channel show? Anybody watch it? What about these exhibits? What do these name? Like these are facts that can be researched, right? Like instead they just throw it out here like, oh, here's some possibilities. I don't know, and then just kind of walk away. As if you've done your job and cast doubt on the whole case. So he continues, children are incredibly perceptive. The memories often outstrip adults. Given him that he was obsessed with World War II aircraft, it'd be no surprise James soaked up tidbits of information in one ear, out the other. So the theory is that Jack Larson and these other squadron members were on this Natoma boat, including presumably on the aircraft carrier itself. We got the name. It was like a History Channel show, display nobody knows about, or parents talked about it, right? Like it's had to have happened that way. So that's his explanation there. And I guess my response to that would be show me. But furthermore, he doesn't even, Fisher and them don't even attempt to do it with Anne Barron, the sister of James Houston. Right, they just completely leave that detail out, and now the early bird statements on her are kind of light. Just mentioned the sister and the age thing was right, and the nickname Annie. And so maybe you could say, maybe he must have overheard somehow, maybe that meeting when she was there. She said something about an alcoholic father and all these details, or parents learned about it. But it's a very specific set of information, and she certainly didn't remember him talking about it. And it would be odd for that information to get out, and for the mother not to know it, and her not to know that you said it. And then again, how he knew about Ruth, and the ages and stuff. So it's a strong case, and I wasn't terribly impressed with their analysis here and their scholarship, because they get the scholarship wrong, and then they leave out strong aspect of the case, and then they just assume we must have got it from somewhere, or just assume nobody looked into it. That like this History Channel, or didn't bother even to try to look into it themselves, right? And so I have not read all the literature on this case. I'd like to certainly that would be of note. What History Channel episode is it? Were these people ever mentioned? But like if not, right? What are you going to say, right? If you go to the museums that you've been to and they're like, no display on the Tacoma Bay aircraft carrier, and no names here, it's not in any of the History Channel episodes, right? Like what are you going to do? Like those are maybe some loose ends that need to be shored up. Not sure. How thoroughly those possibilities have been looked into. But it certainly isn't enough strong objective throughout the whole case. Especially considering there's so many other cases, right? Like this is a good case, a strong case, but probably not the strongest contemporary case. The Hollywood case probably a little stronger. There's some others, and then certainly like the Swarm Lata, Bish and Chan classic cases, 20 recognitions picking people out of a crowd, even tougher to explain away. In conclusion, I'd say again, this is just we looked at 5 cases, I think, snapshots, tons and tons more. It's not hard for me to go through and find 15 to 20 cases that I think are pretty darn strong. Maybe there's not any that are completely foolproof 1,000%, but pretty close in some of them. And the big question is, whether once you get past the super normal or naturalistic explanation, is whether you need to do reincarnation, or you can do like a super ESP, super psi explanation. And I'll cover this more, but briefly, I will mention that. David Ray Griffin, he considers this possibility, and he raises some objections to the reincarnation hypothesis, and then he raises some objection to the alternative, where he proposes it could be this really strong super ASP, which he calls retropensive inclusion, where you basically just take over somebody's psychological history, is taken over by somebody else. Right, and that's how you get all the memories, just the position skills, right? And he objects. One of his objections, I think, is interesting, is that there's like a deep-seated psychological need, maybe in some cases, for a grown woman to disassociate and channel in somebody else's life and stuff in this kind of way, where it's like a possession or in some cases. Like a mediumship type of experience too, like I discussed earlier. However, young children, not even 2 years old, really expect that kind of disassociation. And then not only that, it's not just like an outright disassociation. It's they know that was me in that life. I got this life. They're never confused, where it's like a possession, or just sort of like that other person whose life just took over and is erased, whatever the 2-year-old. So it's a unique phenomenon that I don't think can easily be explained psychologically. To look into I should have done a little more research into toddler disassociation and toddlers and stuff. but seems to really push the this feature push the super ESP case that children would disassociate and identify with some like dead person, died in World War II 60 years ago, or in a village 120 miles away 9 years ago. So this concludes the reincarnation portion of our talk. Near death